Welcome to the Peak of Geek, where we've hit the top but with no plans to stop. We're heading into the spooky season, and for many of us, that means watching scary movies, playing scary games, or reading scary books. I mean, let's be honest, you never need a reason to indulge in the good old creepy crawlies, or to curl up in a blanket with a cozy book. And for me, there's nothing cozier than the words of horror maestro Stephen King. On a recent reread of Night Shift, a book I hadn't read in a while, I noticed a few things that I didn't the first time around, and it blew my mind. I know, this is a man who probably needs no introduction, but in case you just woke up from a cryogenic sleep or a coma where you suddenly know things you shouldn't, and you're like, what is this YouTube thing? Who is Stephen King? Let's do a very quick rundown. Stephen King was born in 1947 and is one of the best-selling horror authors of all time. He's written over 60 novels, novellas, short story collections, comic books, and non-fiction books. He's also penned screenplays based on his work and original screenplays written from the ground up for the screen. He once directed an absolutely insane movie called Maximum Overdrive, and take it from me, watch the trailer immediately to see a wild-eyed Stephen King who always puts a smile on my face. Oh, he even wrote a musical with John Mellencamp called Ghost Brothers of Darkland County. His work has since been adapted into feature films, short films, television series, miniseries, stage plays, radio shows, comic books, and one infamous musical about a sheltered girl's bad experience at the prom that may not be as bad as you might think.
Doesn't anybody ever get it right? Carrie, why don't they remember I'm Carrie White? Carrie.
Way before Marvel's immensely popular cinematic universe of connected worlds and characters, Stephen King was here doing it first, baby. What began as fun Easter egg references between books to reward savvy readers quickly became so much more when King started writing the Dark Tower series. The story of Roland Deschain, the last gunslinger in a world that has moved on, started out as a Western-inspired tale with science fiction, magic, and mystery, inspired by the Robert Browning poem, Childe Roland to the Dark Tower Came. Eventually, the fabled Dark Tower would come to stand as a beacon that connects the majority of King's work. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. Stephen King's debut novel, Carrie, released in 1974, and the first Dark Tower novel wouldn't be published until 1982. The earliest Easter egg reference I could find in King's work is in the original release of The Stand in 1978, a fan-favorite epic about a flu that destroys most of the world. There's a moment when Mother Abigail refers to the gift of prophecy as the shining lamp of God, sometimes just the shine, which is a clear-cut reference to The Shining, which was published the previous year in 1977. However, before The Stand was published in the fall of 1978, earlier that year, Night Shift hit store shelves, and I was surprised to find references to 3 different Stephen King novels in 4 different stories. 2 that are extremely obvious, 1 that would give readers an aha moment later that year, but 1 that wouldn't actually pay off for another 6 years. Let's start with the obvious ones first. The stories Jerusalem's Lot and One for the Road are both set in and around Jerusalem's Lot, a location familiar to you if you read Salem's Lot. Funny story, the book was originally titled The Second Coming, but King's wife Tabitha thought it sounded like a bad sex story, so he changed it to Jerusalem's Lot. But the publishers thought this new title sounded too religious, so it was shortened to Salem's Lot. Anyway, you're probably already familiar with King's updated version of Dracula if you watched either of the miniseries adaptations or Chapelwaite, a TV series that has since been renewed for an upcoming second season. While Jerusalem's Lot acts as a prequel to King's modern take on vampires, One for the Road acts as a sequel, and both were collected with the original novel in a 2005 illustrated edition, which I don't have. So yes, these stories are clearly connected, but I wanted to get them out of the way before I move on to the references I didn't notice until a more recent reread. The story Night Surf, which was originally published in the spring 1969 edition of Ubris magazine, shows that Stephen King was thinking about survivors of a deadly worldwide plague even back then. Night Surf features a group of college students who find a man dying of the aforementioned plague and decide to, what else? Burn him alive. To be in college again. And the name of this plague? A6, or Captain Trips. Sound familiar? Whether you've read the massive original novel, the uncut version that was even longer, watched the miniseries or recent CBS revival, you know all about the devastation of Captain Trips, or the flu. However, unlike Jerusalem's Lot, Night Surf doesn't seem to be a prequel to The Stand. It's mentioned that this version of Captain Trips actually started in Southeast Asia and not the Mojave Desert. So it's safe to say this takes place in an alternate version of Earth. And as constant readers of the Dark Tower series know, there are other worlds than these. The last reference I want to bring up can be found in Grey Matter, a story originally published in Cavalier magazine in 1973. This one feels inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft and reminded me of The Last of Us 2, that video game about a mutated fungus that got an amazing HBO adaptation earlier this year. Anyway, Grey Matter is about a man who's become a bit of a recluse and drinks a bad can of beer that seems to be transforming him into a strange blob-like creature. You may have watched the adaptation of this story on an episode of Shudder's Creepshow revival back in 2019, which changed the plot a bit and unfortunately completely removed the reference I noticed. The reference in question is to King's future 1986 classic It, about a monster that can take the form of whatever you're afraid of, but usually chooses a clown. For obvious reasons. Whether you read the original novel, watched the classic miniseries starring the legendary Tim Curry as Pennywise, or the massively popular remake with Bill Skarsgård in the role, you know what I'm talking about. There's a passage in Grey Matter that details how a man went down into a sewer, came back out with white hair, and when asked about it later, claims he saw a spider the size of a dog. King fans should immediately remember Pennywise's deadlights, those bright lights that will either kill you, or, if you're lucky, it might just leave your hair white with fright. The spider is of course a nod to Pennywise's disappointing final form. Considering the story was originally published in 1973, and it wouldn't hit store shelves until 1986, that means that King was thinking about something scary down in the sewers for over a decade. There are so many references and Easter eggs throughout the Stephen King library of books, movies, and beyond. This is a man who loves to reward the constant reader, and it creates a unique relationship between the writer and the reader because it feels like we're all in on the same joke. These references also function as an interesting narrative device, since we often get updates on characters from other books. Outside of Black House, Dr. Sleep, and the Bill Hodges trilogy, including his latest book, Holly, Stephen King doesn't normally write full-on sequels. The Dark Tower series is the clear outlier here, since it acts as a sequel to many of his books, especially Salem's Lot. But enough about what I think. What about you? What are your favorite Easter eggs or references in the King of Horror's pantheon of work? Did you know about the ones I mentioned here? Let me know down in the comments below. And until next time, don't, under any circumstances, look into those bright, shining deadlights.